Okay, so mic check. Everything is in check. What I wanted to do is actually I want to read right now, and here is the laptop for searching meanings, and it's 11:30, 12. Like I will try to read for 1 hour, I think, but and let's see. So experience in concentration camp. I was at nearly. I have already read so many things, but okay. I shall leave to the distilled contents of this book into dry theories. Okay. For the war gave us, yeah, when the symptom of the characters eventually moved and we get the systems. Okay. Uh, I will start from page 23, and from now I will complete this book very early, like very soon. I will try to do it. So everything is well. Uh, I don't know about focus, but let's it will be fine actually. Okay, let's start. With the progressive down, the outlines of an immense camp became visible. Long stretches of several rows of barbed wire fences, watchtowers, searchlights, and long columns of raised human figures, grey in the greyness of dawn, trekking along the straight, desolate roads to what destination we did not know. There were isolated shouts and whistles of command. We did not know their meaning. My imagination led me to see gallows with people dangling on them. I was horrified. But this was just as well, because step by step we had to become accustomed to a terrible and immense horror. Eventually, we moved into the station. The initial silence was interrupted by shouted commands. We were to hear those rough, shrill tones from them on, over and over again in all the camps. Their sound was almost like the last cry of a victim, and yet there was a different. It had a rasping hoarseness. Rasping hoarseness meaning. Mm, rasping hoarseness. There were isolated shouts and whistles of command. We did not knew their meaning. My as if it came from throat of a man who had to keep shouting like that, a man who was being murdered again and again. The carriage doors were flung open, and a small detachment of prisoners stormed inside. They wore striped uniforms, their heads were shaved, but they looked well fed. They spoke in every possible European tongue, and all with a certain amount of humor which sounded grostic. Grostesque. Under the circumstance, it's like a drowning man clutching a straw. My inborn optimism, which has often controlled my feelings even in the most desperate situation, clung to this thought. These prisoners look quite well. They seem to be in good spirits and even laugh. Who knows? I might manage to share this their favorable position. In Psychotry. Psychatry. There is a certain condition known as delusion of repress meaning, delusion of reprieve meaning. The condemned man immediately before his execution gets the illusion that he might be reprieved at the very last minute. We too clung to shreds of hope and believe to the last moment that it would not be bad. Just the sight of the red cheeks and round faces of those prisoners was a great encouragement. Little did we knew then that they formed a specially chosen elite who 4 years had been the receiving squad for new transparent as they rolled into the station day after day. They took charge of the new arrivals and their luggage, including scarce items and smuggled jewelry. Auschwitz must have been a strange spot in this Europe of the last years of the war. There must have been unique treasures of gold and silver, platinum and diamonds, not only in the huge storehouses but also in the hands of SS. 1,500 captives were cooped up in a shed built to accommodate probably 200 at the most. We were cold and hungry, and there was not room enough for everyone to squat on the bare ground, let alone to lie down. Once 5 ounce piece of bread was our only food in our 4 days. Yet I heard the senior prisoners in charge of the shed bargain with one member of the receiving party about a tie pin made of platinum and diamonds. Most of the profits would eventually be traded with for liquor snaps. SCHNAPPS meaning. I do not remember anymore just how many thousands of marks were needed to purchase the quantity of snaps required for a gay evening, but I do know that those long-term prisoners needed snaps. Under such conditions, who could blame them for trying to dope themselves? There was another group. There was another group of prisoners who got liquor supplied in almost unlimited quantities by the SS. These were the men who were employed in the gas chambers and crematoriums, and who knew were very well that one day they would be replied by a new shift of men, and that they would have to leave their enforced role of executioner and become victims themselves. Nearly everyone in our transport lived under the illusion that he would be reprieved, that everything would be yet be well. Well, we did not realize the meaning behind the scene that was to follow presently. We were told to leave our luggage in the train and to fall into two lines, woman on one side, man on the other, in order to file past a senior SS officer. Surprisingly enough, I had the courage to hide my heavier sack under my coat. HAVERSACK meaning. My line filled past the officers, man by man. I realized that it would be dangerous if the officer spotted my bag. He would at least knock me down. I knew that from We who were saved the minority of our transfer found out the truth in the evening. I inquired from prisoners who had been there for some time where my colleague and friend P had been sent. Was he sent to the left side? Yes, I replied. Then you can see him there, I was told. Where? A hand pointed to the chimney a few hundred yards off, which was sending a column of flame up into the grey sky of Poland. It dissolved into a sinister cloud of smoke. That's where your friend is, floating up to heaven, was the answer, but I still did not understand until the truth was explained to me in plain words. But I am telling things out of their turn. From a psychological point of view, we had a long way in front of us from the break of the dawn in the station until our first night's rest at the camp. Escorted by SS guards with loaded guns, we were made to run from the station, past electrically charged barbed wire, through the camp to the cleansing station. For those of us who had passed the first selection, this was a real bath. Again, our illusion of reprieve found confirmation. The SS men seemed almost charming. Soon we found out their reason. They were nice to us as long as they saw watches on our wrist and could persuade us in well-meaning tones to hand them over. Would we not have to hand over all our professions anyway? And why should not that relatively nice person have the watch? Maybe one day he would do one a good turn. We waited in shed which seemed to be enter ANTER ANTEROOM.
Meaning of anteroom, a small room leading to a main one, typically serving as a waiting room.
To the disinfecting chamber, SS men approached and spread out blankets into which we had to throw all our possessions, all our watches and jewelry. There were still new prisoners among us who asked to the amusement of the more seasoned ones who were these as helpers if they could not keep a wedding ring, a medal, or a good luck piece. No one could yet grasp the fact that everything would be taken away. I tried to take one of the old prisoners into my confidence, approaching him furtively. I pointed to the roll of paper in the inner pocket of my coat and said, "Look, this is the manuscript of a scientific book. I know what you will say, that I should be grateful to escape with my life, that should be all I can expect of it. But I cannot help myself. I must keep this manuscript at all costs. It contains my life's work. Do you understand that?" Yes, he was beginning to understand. A grin spread slowly over his face. First piteous, then more amused, mocking, insulting, until he bellowed one word at me in answer to my question, a word that was ever present in the vocabulary of the camp inmates: shit. At the moment, I saw the plain truth and did what marked the culminating point of the first phase of my psychological reaction. I struck out my whole former life. Suddenly, there was a stir among my fellow travelers who had been standing about with pale, frightened face, helplessly debating. Again, we heard the hoarsely shouted comments. We were driven with blows into the immediate enter room of the bath. There were assembled around an assessment who waited until we had all arrived. Then he had, I will I will give you 2 minutes, and time I shall time you by my watch. In these 2 minutes you will get fully undressed and drop everything on the floor where you are standing. You will take nothing with you except your shoes, your belt or suspenders, and possibly a truss. I am starting to count now. With unthinkable haste, people tore off their clothes as the time grew shorter. They became increasingly nervous and pulled clumsily at their underwear, belts, and shoelaces. Then we heard the first sounds of weeping, leather straps beating down on naked bodies. Next, we were herded into another room to be shaved. Not only our heads were shorn, but not a hair was left on our entire bodies. Then, on the showers where we lined up again, we hardly recognized each other, but with great relief, some people noted the real water dripped from the sprays. While we were waiting for the shower, our nakedness was brought home to us. We really had nothing now except our bare bodies, even minus hair. All we possessed literally was our naked existence. What else remained of us as a material link with our former lives? For me, there were my glasses and my belt. The latter I had to exchange later on for a piece of bread. There was an extra bit of excitement in store for the owners of Truces. TRUSSES. In the evening, the senior prisoner in charge of our hut welcomed us with a speech in which he gave us his word of honor that he would hang personally from that beam. He pointed to it. Any person who had shown money or precious stones into his cruse. Proudly, he explained that a senior inhabited the camp laws entitled him to do so. Where our shoes were concerned, matters were not so simple, although we were supposed to keep them. Those who had fairly decent pairs had to give them up after all and were given in exchange shoes that did not fit. In for real trouble were those prisoners who had followed the apparently well meant advice given in the anteroom of the senior prisoners and had shortened their jackboots by cutting the tops off, then smearing soap in the cut edges to hide the sabotage. The assessment seemed to have waited for just that. All suspected of this crime had to go into a small adjoining room. After a time we again heard the lashings of the strap and the screams of tortured men. This time it lasted for quite a while. Thus the illusions some of us still held were destroyed one by one, and then quite unexpectedly most of us were overcome by a grim sense of humor. We knew that we had nothing to lose except our so ridiculously naked lives. When the showers started to run, we all tried every hard to make fun, but both about ourselves and about each other. After all, real water did flow from the sprays. Apart from the strange kind of humor, another sensational side is curiosity. I have experienced this kind of curiosity before as a fundamental reaction towards certain strange circumstances. When my life was once endangered by a climbing accident, I felt only one sensation at the critical moment: curiosity as to whether I should come out of it alive or with a fractured skull or some other injuries. Cold curiosity predominated even in Auschwitz, somehow detaching the mind from its surroundings, which came to be regarded with a kind of objectivity. At that time, one cultivated this state of mind as a means of protection. We were anxious to know what would happen next and what would be the consequence. For example, of our standing in the open air in the chill of late autumn, stark naked and still wet from the showers. In the next few days, our curiosity enveloped into surprise that we did not catch cold. There were many similar surprises in the store for a new rivals. The medicals men among us learn first of all textbook tell lies. Somewhere it is said that men cannot exist without sleep for more than a stated number of hours. Quite wrong. I had been convinced that there were certain things I just could not do. I could not sleep without this, or I could not live with that or the other. The first night in the Auschwitz, we slept in the beds which were constructed in the tires. On each tire, measuring about 6.5 to 8 feet, slept 9 men directly on the board. Two blankets were shared by each 9 men. We could, of course, lie only on our sides, crowded and cuddles against each other, which had some advantages because of the bitter cold. Though it was forbidden to take shoes up to the bunks, some people did use them secretly as pillows in spite of the fact that they were caked with mud. Otherwise, one's had to rest on the crock of an almost dislocated arm, and yet sleep came and brought oblivion and relief from pain for a few hours. I would like to mention a few similar surprises on how much we could endure. We were unable to clean our teeth, and yet, in spite of that and a severe vitamin deficiency, we had healthier gums than ever before. We had to wear the same shirts for half a year until they had almost all appearance of being shirts. For days, we were unable to wash, even partially, because of frozen water pipes, and yet the sores and abrasions on hands, which were dirty from work in the soil, did not suppurate. That is, unless there were frostbite, or, for instance, a light sleeper who used to be disturbed by the slightest noise in the next room now found himself lying pressed against a comrade who snored loudly a few inches from his ear and yet slept quite soundly through the noise. If someone now asked of us the truth of Dostoevsky's statement, Dostoevsky. That flatly defines man as being who can get used to anything. We would reply, yes, a man could get used to anything, but do not ask us how. But our psychological investigations have not taken us that far yet. Neither had we prisoners reached that point. We were still in the first phase of our psychological reaction. The thought of suicide was entered by nearly everyone, if only for a brief time. It was born on the of the hopelessness of the situation, the constant danger of death looming over us daily and hourly, and the closeness of the death suffered by many of the others. From personal convictions, which will be mentioned later, I made myself a firm promise on the first evening in camp that I would not run into the wire. This was a phrase used in camp to describe the most popular method of suicide, touching the electrically charged wire fence. It was not entirely difficult for me to make this decision. There was little point in the committing suicide, since for the average inmate life expectancy, calculating objectively and counting all likely chances, was very poor. He could not with any assurance expect to be among the small percentage of men who survived all the selections. The prisoner of Auschwitz, in the first phase of the shock, did not fear death. Even the gas chambers lost their horrors for him after the first few days. After all, they spared him the act of committing suicide. Friends whom I have met later have told me that I was not one of those whom the shock of admission greatly depressed. I only smiled and quite sincerely when the following episodes occurred the morning after our first night in the Auschwitz. In spite of strict orders not to leave our blocks, a colleague of mine who had arrived in Auschwitz several weeks previously smuggled himself into our hut. He wanted to come and comfort us and tell us few things. He had become so thin that at first we did not recognize him. With a show of good humor and devil may care attitude, he gave us a few hurried tips. Don't be afraid, don't fear the selection. Dr. M, the SS medical chief, has a softened spot for doctors. This was wrong, my friends. Kindly words were misleading. One prisoner, the doctor of a block of huts and a man of some 60 years, told me that he had entered Dr. M to let off his son, who was destined for gas. Dr. M coldly refused. But one thing I beg of you, he continued, shave daily if at all possible, even if you have to use a piece of glass to do it, even if you have to give up your last piece of bread for it. You will look younger, and the scraping will make your cheeks look ruddier. If you want to stay alive, there is only one way, look fit for work. If you have limp because, let us say, you have a smaller blister on your heel and an assessment spots this, he will wave you aside, and the next day you are sure to be gassed. Do you know what we mean by a Moslem? Moslem meaning a man who looks miserable, down and out, sick and emaciated, and who cannot manage hard physical labor any longer. This is a Moslem. Sooner or later, usually sooner, every Moslem goes to the gas chamber. Therefore, remember, shave, stand, and walk smartly. Then you need not be afraid of gas. All of you standing here, even if you have only been here 24 hours, you need not fear gas. Expect perhaps you. And then he pointed to me and said, I hope you don't mind me telling you, Frankel. To the others, he repeated, of all of you, he is the only one who must fear the next election, so don't worry. And I smiled. I am now convinced that anyone in my place on that day would have done the same. I think it was leasing. One said, there are things which must cause you to lose your reason, or you have none to lose. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. Even we psychiatrists expect the reactions of a man to an abnormal situation, such as being committed to an asylum, to be abnormal in proportion to the degree of his normality. The reaction of a man, his admission to a concentration camp also represents an abnormal state of mind, but judge objectively, it is a normal and as well as will be shown later. Typical reaction to the given circumstances. These reactions, as I have described them, begin to change in a few days. The prisoner passed away passed from the first to the second phase, the phase of relative apathy, in which he achieved a kind of emotional death. Apart from the already described reaction, the newly arrived prisoner experienced the tortures of other most painful emotion, all of which he tried to detain. First of all, there was his boundless longing for his home and his family. This often could become so acute that he felt himself consumed by longing. Then there was disgust with all the ugliness which surrounded him, even in its mere external forms. Most of the prisoners were given a uniforms of rags which would have made a scarecrow elegant by comparison. Between the huts in the camp lay pure filth, and the more one worked to clear it away, the more one had to come in contact with it. It was a favorite practice to detail a new arrival to a work group whose job was to clean the rings and remove the sewage. If, as usually happened, some of the excrement splashed into his face during its transport over bumpy fields, any sign of disgust by the prisoners or any attempt to wipe off the filth would and only be punished with a blow from a capo, and thus the mortification of normal reaction was hastened. At first, the prisoner looked away if he saw the punishment parades of another group. He could not bear or see fellow prisoners march up and down for hours in the mere their movements directed by blows. Days or weeks later, things changed. Early in the morning, when it was still dark, the prisoner stood in front of the gates with his detachment ready to meet. He heard a scream and saw how a comrade was knocked down, pulled on his feet again, and knocked down once more. And why? He was feverish but had reported to sick bay at an improper time. Feverish.
Meaning of feverish. Characterized by or displaying a frenetic excitement or energy.
He was being punished for this irregular attempt to be relieved of his duties. But the prisoner who had passed into the second stage of this psychological reaction did not avert his eyes anymore. By then his feelings were blunted, and he watched unmoved. Another example, he found himself waiting at sick bay, hoping to be granted 2 days of light work inside the camp because of injuries or perhaps edema or fever. He stood unmoved while a 12-year-old boy was carried in who had been forced to stand at attention for hours in the snow or to work outside with the bare feet because there were No shoes for him in the camp. His toes had become frostbitten, and the doctor on duty picked up the black uh, ja- gangrenous stumps with tweezers one by one, disguised horror and pity are emotions that our spectator could not really feel on no more. The sufferers, the dying and the dead become such commonplace sights to him after a few weeks of camp life that they could not move him anymore. I spent some time in hut for typhus patients who ran very high temperatures and were often delirious, many of them moribund. After one of them had just died, I watched without any emotional upset the scene that followed, which was repeated over and over again with each plate. One by one, the prisoners approached the still warm body. One grabbed the remains of a messy meal of potatoes. Another decided that the corpse's wooden shoes were an improvement on his own and exchanged them. A third man did the same with the dead man's coat, and another man was glad to be able to secure some just imagine genuine strength. All this I watched with unconcern. Eventually, I asked the nurse to move the body. When he decided to do so, he took the corpse by its legs, allowing it to drop into the small corridor between the two rows of a board, which were the beds for the 50 typhus patients, and drag it across the bumpy earthen floor towards the door. The two steps which led up to the open air always constitute a problem for us, since we were exhausted from a chronic lack of food. After a few months stay in the camp, we could not walk up to these steps, which were each about 6 inches high, without our putting our hands on the doors, jams to pull over cells. The man with the corpse approached the steps wearily. He dragged himself upon, then the body, first the feet, then the trunk, and finally, with an uncanny rattling noise, the head of the corpse bumped up the two steps. My place was on the opposite side of the hut, next to the small sole window, which was built near the floor, while my cold hands clasped a bowl of hot soup from which I sipped greedily. I happened to look out the window. The corpse, which had been removed, stared in at me with glazed eyes. 2 hours before, I had spoken to that man. Now I continued sipping my soup. If my lack of emotion had not surprised me from the standpoint of professional interest, I would not remember the incident now because there was little feeling involved in it. Apathy, the blunting of the emotions, and the feeling that one could not care anymore. APATHY.
Meaning of apathy, lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern.
Where the symptoms arising during the second stage of the prisoner's psychological reactions and which eventually made him insensitive to daily and hourly beatings. By means of this insensibility, the prisoner soon surrounded himself with a very necessary protective shell. Beatings occurred slightly, provocations Beating occurred in the slightest provocation, sometimes for no reason at all. For example, bread was rationed out and at our work site, and we had to line up for it. Once the man behind me stood off a little to one side, and that lack of symmetry displeased on the SS guard. I did not know what was going on the line behind me, nor I in the mind of the SS guard. But suddenly I received two sharp blows of my head. Only then did I spot the guard at my side who was using his stick. At such a moment, it is not the physical pain which hurts the most, and this applies to adults as much as to be punished children. It is the mental agony caused by the injustice, the unreasonableness of it all. Strangely enough, a blow which does not even find its mark can, under certain circumstances, hurt more than one that finds its mark. Once I was standing on a railway track in a snowstorm. In spite of the weather, our party had to keep on working. I worked quite hard at mending the track with gravel, since that was the only way to keep warm. For only one moment, I paused to get my breath and to lean on my shovel. Unfortunately, the guard turned around just then and thought I was loafing. The pain he caused me was not from my insults or any blows. The guard did not think it worth his while to say anything, not even a swear word, to the wretched, emaciated figure standing before him, which probably reminded him only vaguely of a human from instead. He playfully picked up a stone and threw it at me. That, to me, seemed the way to attract the attention of a beast, to call a domestic animal back to its shop, a creature with which you have so little in common that you do not even punish it. The most painful part of beatings is the insult which they imply. At one time, we had to carry some long, heavy guiders over icy tracks. If one man slipped, the endangered not only himself but all the others who carried the same guider. Guide, GRDR. An old friend of mine had an congenially dislocated hip. He was glad to be capable of working in spite of it, since the physical disabled were almost certainly sent to the death with when a selection took place. He leaned over the track with an especially heavy grinder and seemed about to fall and drag the others with him. And yet I was not carrying a guider, so I jumped to his assistance without stopping to think. I was immediately hit on the back, rudely reprimanded, and ordered to return to my place. A few minutes previously, the same guard who struck me had told us deprecatingly that we pigs lacked the spirit of comradeship. Another time, in a forest with a temperature at 2 degrees Fahrenheit, we began to dig up to the topsoil, which was frozen hard, in order to lay water pipes. I had grown rather big physically. Along came a foreman with chubby rosy cheeks. His face definitely reminded me of a pig's head. I noticed that he wore lovely warm gloves in the bitter cold. For a time he watched me silently. I felt that trouble was brewing, for in front of me lay the mound of earth which showed exactly how much I had dug. Then he began, "You pig, I have been watching you the whole time. I'll teach you to work yet. Wait till you dig dirt with your teeth. You'll die like an animal. In 2 days I'll finish you off. You'll never done a stroke of a work in your life. What were you, a swine, a businessman?" I was past kidding, but I had to take his threat of killing me seriously, so I straightened up and looked him directly in the eye. "I was a doctor, a specialist. What, doctor? I bet you get a lot of money out of people." As it happened, I did most of my work for no money at all in clinics for the poor, but now I had said too much. He threw himself on me and knocked me down, shouting like a madman. I can no longer remember what he shouted. I want to show with this apparently trivial story that there are moments where indignation can rouse even a seemingly hardened prisoner. Indigning, indignation meaning
Meaning of indignation, anger or annoyance provoked by what is perceived as unfair treatment.
indignation not about cruelty or pain, but about the insult connected with it. The time blood rushed to my head because I had to listen to a man judge my life who had a little idea of it. A man, I must confess, the following remark which I made to my fellow prisoners after the scene afforded me childish relief, who looked so vulgar and brutal that the nurse in the outpatient ward in my hospital would not even have admitted him in the waiting room. Fortunately, the capo in my working party was obligated to me. He had taken a liking to me because I listened to his love stories and matrimonial troubles, which he poured out during the long marches to our work site. I had made an impression on him with my diagnosis of his character and with my psychotherapeutic advice. After that, he was grateful, and this had already been of value to me. On several previous occasions, he had reserved a place for me next to him in one of the first 5 rows of our detachment, which usually consisted of 280 men. That favor was important. We had to line up early in the morning while it was still dark. Everybody was afraid of being late and off having to stand in the back rows if men were required for an unpleasant and disliked job. The senior capo appeared and usually collected the men he needed from the back rows. These men had to march away to an other especially dreaded kind of work under the command of strange guard. Occasionally the senior capo chose men from the first five rows just to catch those who tried to be clever. All protests and entry entreaties were silenced by a few well-aimed kicks, and the chosen victims were chased to the meeting place with shouts and blows. However, as long as my capo felt the need of pouring out his heart, this could not happen to me. I had a guaranteed place of honor next to him. But there was another advantage too. Like nearly all the camp inmates, I was suffering from edema. My leg was so swollen and the skin of them so tightly stretched that I could scarcely bend my knees. I had to leave my shoes unlaced in order to make them fit my swollen feet. There would not have been space for socks even if I had any, so my partly bare feet were always wet and my shoes always full of snow. This, of course, caused frostbite and chilblains. Every single step became real torture. Chilblains. Childblins.
According to Apollo hospitals, skin sores or bumps that occur after exposure to very cold temperatures.
Every single step became real torture. Clumps of ice formed on our shoes during our march over snow-covered fields. Over and again men slipped, and those following behind stumbled on the top of them. Then the column would stop for a moment, but not for long. One of the guards soon took action and walked over the men with the butt of his rifle to make them get up over the men with get up quickly. The more to the front of the column you were, the less often you were disturbed by having to stop and then to make up for lost time by running on your painful feet. I was very happy to be the personally appointed physician to his honor the capo and to march in the first row at an even pace as an additional payment for my service says I could be sure that as long as soup was being dealt out at lunchtime at our bedside he would he would, when my turn came, dip the ladle right to the bottom of the vat and fish out a few pieces. The capo's former army officer even had the courage to whisper to the foreman whom I had quarreled with that he knew me to be an unusually good writer. That that didn't help matters, but he nevertheless managed to save my life. One of the many times it was to be saved. The day after the episode with the foreman, he smuggled me into another work party. There were foremen who felt sorry for us, who did their best to ease our situation, at least at the building site. But even they kept on reminding us that an ordinary laborer did several times as much work as we did, and in a shorter time. But they did see reason if they were told that a normal workman did not live on 10 half inches of bread. Theoretically, actually, we often had less than one three-fourth points of thin soup per day that a normal laborer did not live under the mental stress we had to submit to not having news of our families who had either been sent to another camp or guessed right away. Then a normal workman was not threatened by the death continuously, daily and hourly. I even I even allowed myself to say once to her kindly foreman, if you could learn from me how to do a brain operation in as short time as I am learning this road from work from you, I would have great respect for you. And he grinned. There was some part like I was thinking, what am I reading? If those I like, if I imagine those things horrible. Yeah, I don't even want to make a scenario in my head for that kind of situation. If I imagine like, oh, why that's so bad actually. I mean, apathy. The main symptom of the second phase was a necessarily mechanism of a self-defense. Reality dim and all efforts and all emotions were centered in one task, preserving one's own life, that of the other fellow. It was typical to hear the prisoners while they were being herded back to camp from the work sites in the evening side with relief and say, well, another day is over. It can be readily understood that such a state of strain, coupled with the constant necessity of concentrating on the task of staying alive, forced the prisoner's inner life down to a primitive level. Several of my colleagues in camp who were trained in physics, psychoanalysis often spoke of a regression in the camp inmates, a retreat to a more primitive form of mental life. His wishes and desires became obvious in his dreams. What did the prisoner dream about most frequently? Of bread, cake, cigarettes, and nice warm baths. The lack of having this simple desire satisfied led him to seek wish fulfillment in dreams. Whether these dreams did any good in another matter is another matter. The dreamer had to wake from them to the reality of camp life and to the terrible contrasts between that and his dream illusion. I shall never forget how I was roused one night by the groans of a fellow prisoner who threw himself about in his sleep, obviously having a horrible nightmare. Since I had always been specially sorry for people who suffered from fearful dreams or deliria, I wanted to wake the poor man. Suddenly, I drew back the hand which was ready to shake him, frightened at the thing I was about to do. At that moment, I became intensely conscious of the fact that no dream, no matter how horrible, could be as bad as the reality of the camp which surrounded us and to which I was about to recall him. Because of the high degree of undernourished punishment which the prisoners suffered. It was natural that the desire for food was the major primitive instinct around which mental life centered. Let us observe the majority of prisoners when they happened to work near each other and were or once not closely watched, they would immediately start discussing food. One fellow would ask another working next to him in the ditch with his favorite dishes were. Then they would exchange recipes and plan the menu for the day when they would have a reunion. The reunion. The day is a day in a distant future when they would be liberated and return home. They would go on and on, picturing it all in detail until suddenly a warning was passed down the trench, usually in the form of special password or number. The guard is coming. Always regarded the discussions about food as dangerous, as it is wrong. It is not wrong to provoke the organism with which little and effective pictures of delicacies. Delicacies.
Meaning of delicacy, fineness or intricacy of texture or structure.
When it has somehow managed to adapt itself to extremely small. And has somehow managed to adapt itself to extremely small rations and low calories, though it may afford momentary psychological relief. It is an illusion which psychologically surely must not be without danger. During the later part of our imprisonment, the daily ration consisted of very watery soup given out once daily and the usual small bread ration. In addition to that, there was the so-called extra allowance consisting of three-fourths of ounce of margarine or of a slice of poor quality sausage or of a little piece of cheese or a bit of synthetic honey or a spoonful of watery jam, varying daily in calories. This diet was absolutely adequate, especially taking into consideration our heavy manual work and our constant exposure to the cold inadequate clothing. The sick who were under special care, that is, those who were allowed to lie in the huts instead of leaving the camp for work, were even worse off. When the last layers of subcutaneous fat had vanished, and we looked like skeletons disguised with skin and rags, we could watch our bodies beginning to devour themselves. The organism digested its own protein, and the muscles disappeared. And the body had no powers of resistance left. One after another, the members of the little community in our hut died. Each of us could calculate with fair accuracy whose turn would be next, and when his own would come. After many observations, we knew the symptoms well, which made the correction of our prognosis quite certain. He won't last long, or this is the next one. We whispered to each other, and when, during our daily search for lies, we saw our own naked bodies in the evening, we thought alike, the body here, my body is really a corpse already. What has become of me? I am but a small portion of a glass mass of human flesh, of a mass behind barbed wire, crowded into a few earthen hearts, a mass of which daily certain portion began to rot because it has become lifeless. I mentioned how unavoidable were the thoughts about food and favorite dishes, which forced themselves into